Someone once told me they changed their whole garden because of mine. And I remember thinking, I never told you to do that. That's when I started wondering how many things we grow that don't stay where we planted them, and how often that happens without us even realizing. Today I want to talk about the garden you didn't mean to create. Not just the garden we tend, but the one people carry with them after they leave. I'm Michelle, and yes, it took me a minute to realize that too. Sometimes what we grow doesn't stay with us, and many of us never see it happening. There are certain things we find valuable as gardeners. A rare hosta, a really clean garden edge, fresh mulch laid just so, as if royalty were expected by noon. I've done more adjusting than I'd like to admit. I've moved a plant a few inches to the left. I've turned containers for better angles. I've stood in the middle of the garden in my flip-flops, overthinking. But over time, I noticed this. Small things I didn't think anyone was paying attention to started showing up in unexpected ways. People rarely remember what we think is important. They remember how our garden makes them feel. Not what we arranged, but what they experienced. The cool shade on a warm day, a path that invited them forward, leaves that move on the breeze, the sense that life can be beautiful in a quiet corner. That part has legs. It moves us. I think part of me believed impact had to look obvious. Recognition, applause, neighbors slowing their cars to see. Although, if anyone slows near my garden, it's likely because the weeds are trying to overtake the place. But the real things often happen quietly. Someone sees your patience. They see your willingness to keep tending something still unfinished. And the garden is always unfinished, isn't it? There's always something more you can do. They see your care for small things others may overlook, those little details. And they borrow from it. They borrow from you. That's influence. It's not loud or glamorous, but it's real. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought influence had to be obvious. I used to think compliments meant I was succeeding, and criticism, real or imagined, meant I was failing. If someone looked too long at a struggling plant, I'd start explaining before they even asked. This one had a rough spring, I'd say, or it usually looks better by June. Bounced back last year, I think it'll be fine. Nobody had accused me of anything. Nobody questioned me about anything. I was cross-examining myself in my own garden. I didn't realize it then, not really. And then one afternoon I saw it differently. A neighbor sat with me near the hostas tucked under the trees. Nothing grand, no fountain, no estate garden theatrics, just hosta flowers above layered leaves. A hummingbird was feeding. Bamboo wind chimes sounded softly. Cool shade in the middle of the city. She sat there taking it in and said, I didn't know a city yard could feel like this. She didn't say anything else. She just sat quietly for a moment, like she'd found something she didn't know she was missing. That stayed with me, not because she wasn't admiring my hostas, instead because she was recognizing something more was possible, maybe contemplating her own. It wasn't just my garden anymore. It was the one growing in other people. Months later, she told me she'd cleared a neglected corner at home, planted some shade plants, added a bench, and now she had coffee there most every morning. Yes, she'd been contemplating her own. That changed how I thought about what was actually happening in my garden. While I was over here worrying about slug holes in the hostas, she was building a refuge. Hostas are good teachers this way. They are not loud plants. They work in a more subtle language of texture, form, calm, consistency. A mature clump of hostas says something many people need to hear. You do not need to be flashy to be valuable, although many are flashy. You do not need full sun to flourish, although many flourish in full sun. You do not need to bloom constantly to matter. Yeah, hostas don't bloom constantly, do they? Some gardens asked to be noticed. Some gardens are noticed anyway. Those are not always the same garden. And the second kind often belongs to ordinary people like you and me, quietly tending what we have. You see it happen too, don't you? A neighbor suddenly freshes a forgotten bed. A friend sends a photo of her first container. Someone asks what that plant is with unique and generous interest. A person decides beauty might begin right where they are. So here's the distinction I've noticed. There is the garden you plan for yourself and the garden your presence plants in other people, even when you never intended to plant anything at all. The second may be our greater work. Because flowers fade, but what we feel stays longer than we think. And chances are, you've already influenced how someone else feels, whether you know it or not. If the garden is where you contemplate what life reveals, you're always welcome here at Hosta Heaven. Until the next chapter, in the Hosta Garden.